This video provides an overview of the obscenity and classification laws in Australia. The starting principle for these laws is that we live in a free and democratic society that values free speech. Therefore, adults should be able to read, hear, and see what they want to. What our laws do, though, is protect adults from involuntary exposure to material they find offensive and protect children from material that is likely to harm or disturb them. As a society, we also do not condone depictions of extreme violence, sexual violence, or portrayals of people that demean them, and so the laws also restrict this type of content as well. These principles are managed through our content classification system and through restrictions on obscene content. You should be familiar with the classification system through seeing movies and television. You should be familiar with these icons that apply to different levels of classification for audiovisual items. Content is classified by a classification board. This is a board of people drawn from the Australian community and designed to be representative of the Australian community. So they represent a broad spectrum of ages, backgrounds, and geographical areas. They are not people with any special qualifications as it relates to law or as it relates to content classification. Instead, they are just ordinary people. They are supposed to reflect what ordinary members of the community would think is offensive or not. The board takes into account several factors when deciding how to classify films, videos, and games. The principles underpinning their decisions are the standards that are generally acceptable by reasonable adults. They look at the literary, artistic, or educational merit of a film or video or game, the character of that content, including whether it is medical, legal, or scientific, and the people who are likely to see it. So, for example, a medical film might show a body being cut into or things that might otherwise be deemed violent in a different context. The board will look at the content according to how violent it is, its use of coarse language, drug use, nudity, and sex, as well as what themes are apparent in the content. So you might be familiar with seeing warnings on television shows that have adult themes, for example, or strong themes. The board might decide that if content deals with harassment, for example, that is an adult theme that children should not be exposed to. They look across these themes and they consider them against certain factors, including the detail, such as close-ups and slow motion of scenes. For example, is it close-ups of violence, close-ups of drug use? Any special effects, whether the scenes are prolonged or repeated, whether they are realistic rather than stylized, and whether it is interactive or passive. This is particularly relevant for games. They will then decide how these factors appear in the content according to that schema you see there, ranging from very mild to very high, and award the appropriate classification. So G, general audience, including children, for very mild, parental guidance for mild, etc. Strong in this case is weaker than high. So strong content might be classified mature audiences, restricted to people 15 years or older, whereas high might be R-rated, which is restricted to adults 18 years or older. Very high instances of violence, drug use, etc. might result in the content being refused classification. That is what the RC stands for, refused classification. And the effect of that is essentially that the content is banned in Australia, because if something is refused classification, it cannot be shown to audiences. For written publications, particularly books and magazines, there is a slightly different system of classification. Most books will be unrestricted, but if they are considered to be mature, they might have a warning on them. Or if they contain images of either sexual nudity, sexualized nudity, or actual sexual activity, then they might be restricted either by being required to be sold in a sealed wrapper or only in particular premises. So this is particularly the case for pornographic material. And again, books and publications can be refused classification, which means they cannot be legally sold, hired, or advertised or imported into Australia. Various books have been banned in Australia at some point or another, although standards do change over time, and usually standards change so that the content is no longer banned. So in the past, Lolita by Nabokov was banned, as was American Psycho, D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, and the Peaceful Pill Handbook, which was a book about euthanasia. All of these books were at one point or another banned either in Australia or in a state or territory of Australia. This takes us to obscenity. Obscenity is, in general, that content that is refused classification will be refused classification because it is obscene. This is defined to be material that is offensive to contemporary community standards. It is important to note here that standards change over time, and it is important to take account of the context of the content and how audiences will be exposed to that content. So this is, again, the job of the classification board to weigh up these things. Under the Criminal Code in Queensland, it is actually a misdemeanor to knowingly and without lawful excuse publicly sell, distribute, or expose for sale any obscene book or material, including pictures, photographs, or computer-generated images, as well as exhibiting indecent shows or performances, or displaying indecent or obscene artwork. It's important to note here that these are all public acts, so it is not against the law to possess, say, a copy of banned material or obscene material, but it may be against the Criminal Code to publicly display, distribute, or sell that material. That is a misdemeanor, which is essentially a minor crime under the law, and the punishment is up to 2 years imprisonment. How does all of this affect things in real life? Well, it affects where and to whom products can be sold or displayed, including things like films in cinemas. For television in particular, free-to-air TV that is, it impacts when films or programs can be screened. So the free-to-air broadcasters are regulated according to when they can display certain content before certain times, particularly during times when children might be viewing television. They are generally not permitted to screen content that is rated in the higher classifications such as M, MA, and R. It also impacts how products can be sold. So as I mentioned, some books can only be sold in protective wrappers. If you produce content, say you're a film producer, you apply to get it classified, and it is classified in a way that you dislike. Perhaps you are hoping for an M classification and it receives an R classification. It is possible to apply for review to the Classification Review Board, which is a separate board to the board that initially classified your content. It is also possible to apply for judicial review about whether the classification guidelines have been properly applied. But generally, what producers might find is that the easiest thing to do is to excise the offending material from their movie. So say they wanted an M-rated movie because that means more people can see it and they might make more money, but it is classified R because of a particular scene of drug use or sexual activity, then that scene might be either taken out or toned down, and then the producer may reapply for classification to see if that classification can move down.